So let's talk about Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm gonna say a lot of names here. I don't know how to pronounce any of them. I've just read them, so just deal with it. First things first, if you believe that Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell were just doing this because, like, Epstein was horny and wanted to have sex with children, and he wanted to invite his friends over, like, you are injecting mainstream media narrative spin directly into your bloodstream. You are overdosing on fake news. Purpose was blackmail, as well as Epstein's own degenerate sexual interest, but the main purpose was blackmail. And we would have known about this because in 2019, when Epstein was caught, he planned to expose it all to prevent himself going to jail for the rest of his life. But that was never revealed to us because in order to prevent himself from saving himself, Epstein killed himself. He couldn't live with the guilt of even thinking about exposing all these people. But if he didn't kill himself, then that implies he's more of a foot soldier than a kingpin, that there are bigger fish and bigger motivations at play than just Epstein himself. And who is Ghislaine Maxwell? I mean, according to the mainstream media, according to her prosecutors in her federal trial, she's apparently his secretary, who dabbled in providing children for sex. The background you've likely heard about her from the mainstream media is that she is the wealthy heiress of an empire. But what empire is she the heir to? The empire is that of her father, Robert Maxwell. Immediately following World War II, Robert Maxwell made friends with British intelligence MI6 as well as the Rothschilds. The Allies then gave Robert Maxwell an exclusive publications deal in Germany, and that is where Robert Maxwell began his media empire. With the protection and support of the Rothschild family, it quickly became an internationally successful media company. While Robert Maxwell had a long history with intelligence agencies, including the Soviets, the Americans, the British, and Israel, in 1961 he was recruited into Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service. So while running a media business which had its tentacles slithering across the entire globe, he was also an international intelligence operative. The Soviets, the FBI, the CIA, MI6, he was essentially in every single pool when it came to international intelligence. Now, Robert Maxwell's career in Mossad is too long and insane to get into deeply, so I'll just tell one story which I feel like gives you an understanding of the types of things that he was doing for Israeli intelligence. Rafi Eitan was an Israeli director of intelligence in the now-defunct Department of Lekin. In the early 80s, he heard that the U.S. Department of Justice was using this amazing revolutionary software called Promise. This is the precursor of the current NSA's PRISM system, which tracks every money interaction, the movement of people, all the social medias. It essentially has entire understanding and knowledge, information of everything that is happening in a country. Now, Eitan and one of his friends, Earl Bryan, a CIA operative and a longtime advisor to Ronald Reagan, Eitan and Bryan decided it would be an epic idea if they could install a trapdoor to Promise so that whoever was using it, the information would be shared with them, but also with Bryan and Eitan. So after getting a software engineer to install said trapdoor, they had to turn to their friend Ed Meese, the Attorney General at the time, to get him in on it. Ed Meese used the power of the Department of Justice to drive the company which created Promise into bankruptcy. So now Eitan and Bryan were free to sell it as they wished. Attorney General Ed Meese wasn't just friends with Bryan, his wife was actually a major investor in Bryan's businesses. Eitan and Bryan then sold Promise to Jordan, one of the main countries which rivals Israel, as well as some small private investment firms. And now Israel, and perhaps also the CIA, had all of the information of all of these companies and of Jordan. But this wasn't enough. They needed someone who could travel around the world and sell this to every single country on the planet. And that man was Robert Maxwell. Maxwell proceeded to sell Promise to countries all across the world in Europe, Africa, Latin America. Eventually, Israeli intelligence told Robert Maxwell that it's time to start selling it to America. Robert Maxwell purchased Information on Demand, a shell company based in America, in order to sell Promise to Americans and the U.S. government. Robert Maxwell met with none other than Henry Kissinger to negotiate it. Henry Kissinger directed Robert Maxwell to bribe Texas Senator John Tower Tower to the tune of $200,000. And with John Tower in his pocket, he now had complete and direct access to the White House, as well as access to United States intelligence. These sales were blocked many times by the FBI, but the investigations always were stopped, led by the higher-ups. This was all happening in 1985, and to this day, the FBI refuses to release any information at all related to information on demand. And thus, with the investigations halted, Robert Maxwell and Information on Demand were able to sell PROMIS to Sandia National Laboratories, where most, if not all, the core of American nuclear research was being conducted. And so every Word document, every experiment ever done at that lab was now information that Israel held. Everything that the United States knew about nuclear weapons. The entire time Information on Demand is in operation, Robert Maxwell has his daughters, Isabel and Christine Maxwell, working there in order to sell PROMIS to Fortune 500 companies in America. All of Robert Maxwell's daughters have no shortage of ties to American, British, and Israeli intelligence. Following September 11, 2001, Christine Maxwell and Alan Wade, the director of the CIA, teamed up to create and sell to U.S. national security a software named Chiliad, which would manage our homeland security. At the time, Christine was also working in Israel in a Mossad-funded shell company for communications. After the wild success of selling PROMIS, Robert Maxwell teamed up once again with the CIA and Israeli intelligence for a little thing which you might know of called the Iran-Contra dealings. It was during Iran-Contra when Robert Maxwell met the successful money man and money launderer Jeffrey Epstein. And according to the former senior executive of Israel's military intelligence directorate, Ari Ben-Menashe, this is when Epstein was recruited by Robert Maxwell into Mossad. This was done with the approval of the higher-ups. The director of Israeli military intelligence at the time was Ehud Barak, who is a longtime friend and business associate of Jeffrey Epstein. Ehud Barak went on to become the Prime Minister of Israel. If you don't believe me, here is a photo of Ehud Barak visiting Jeffrey Epstein's New York residence, as well as the women who soon followed. These photos were taken in 2016. The Epstein trial, the Maxwell trial, they are in no way a story of a crazed pedophile billionaire who enjoyed having sex with minors and inviting his friends to do it too. It is a story of how the super wealthy and the international intelligence community maintains absolute control over democracies around the world. What's important are the hundreds of hard drives containing blackmail of important, powerful, wealthy individuals having sex with minors, which are on these hard drives. These hard drives, which were seized by the FBI, have been redacted. They have been sealed by the appointment of Maxwell's federal judge, and the public will never know what was on those 2 duffel bags full of hard drives. What we are seeing through this trial is just one aspect of the dark underbelly behind this illusion of democracy. A small glance into the world that Ghislaine Maxwell and her sisters, her father, and Epstein, and likely most of the main movers and shakers in politics traverse every single day, and the public can never be allowed to know, because if the public knew, these people would be hanging from a rope.